Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this screening of Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America, and for this post-screening discussion. My name is Mimi Plochet, and I'm the Artistic Director of the Chicago International Film Festival, and it is our pleasure to present this preview screening of this powerful and important film. And I would like to thank Sony Pictures Classics for sharing it with us and with our audiences. Just so everyone knows, the film opens in theaters this Friday here in Chicago, so I ask you to please help to spread the word. We really want to get audiences into the theater. I'm delighted tonight to introduce the participants of tonight's discussion. First is our moderator. Our moderator tonight is Lali Bowen, who is a writer, journalist, and media funder based in Chicago. Thank you for being here, Lali. We're also very happy to have in conversation the two directors of the film, Emily Kunstler and Sarah Kunstler. Welcome, Emily and Sarah. And we're very honored also to welcome writer and producer Jeffrey Robinson. Jeffrey, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for being with us. As a reminder to the audience, please put your questions in the comments box and we will be able to share them with the participants. And I'm just going to hand it over to Lali.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Mimi. Who controls the past also controls the future. Dr. Maya Angelou taught us that history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, it need not be lived again. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us tonight at this screening of Who We Are with the Chicago International Film Festival. We're coming to you on the first day of Black History Month. So first, happy Black History Month and happy Lunar Year to all who celebrate it. As Mimi said, I'm Lali Bowen, a journalist, writer, and media funder here in Chicago, and I'm here to help guide this conversation with our third guest. But of course, we want you all to be an active part of the conversation. So if you have your questions, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to it. I'm so happy to be with you, Emily, Sarah, and Jeffrey. Because we have a limited time, I'm tempted to jump right into the questions, but I don't want to skip the decency of first checking in with you to see just how you're feeling and what you're holding close to your mind right now.
I think for me, I'm happy that folks are seeing this film. This is what we wanted, is for as many eyes in America to get on the film, and so right now I'm grateful that that's beginning to happen.
Emily, I mean, I think I'm feeling the same way. I'm a little bit overwhelmed right now, actually. You know, the three of us did some press earlier today, and we're actually getting to a point in talking about this film together where I think we're even surprising each other a little bit with, you know, we've been sharing more and surprising each other with, you know, kind of how this is hitting us and how this has impacted us individually. And so it's been a really great experience to get to share that with Emily and Jeffrey.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe that on Friday we'll be opening in over 300 theaters across the country. That's something that I don't think any of us had any expectation of when we started this.
Yeah. Wow. Friday, and an interesting time to open this film. It is such a powerful and important film. I called it sobering when we were backstage with each other. And it comes at a time when the entire nation is wrestling with who gets to tell the story of our history and how we've come to this moment. Jeffrey, I want to start with you as the author of this story and the lead protagonist. This film forces the viewers to reckon with America's racist past by looking at evidence. And you tell us that you came to this journey yourself when you started to think about how you would explain race in this moment to your nephew's son. Can you talk about your own personal journey of studying America's true history? And with self study being so important, how long did you research? How did you approach the topic? Just how did you even get started on this journey, and when?
My my son Matthew came in 2011 to live with me in Seattle, me and my wife, and I started researching then. And at first, it was not very specific. I was just looking. I didn't really know what I was looking for, and what I started finding were things about our history that I had never heard. And I would find something and go, wow, that's remarkable. And it would lead me to something else, and I would go, that's even more remarkable. And at this time, I was a practicing criminal defense lawyer, and the chief of staff at the Who We Are project worked with me at that point, and I would come to work and say, hey, could you get these articles? Could you find this resource? Could you get me this map? And she'd be saying, do we have a case that's about this? What is this? And I said, I don't know what it is. But I just kept looking at things, and I think I'm curious, but I also think maybe I was looking for something, and when I started to find these things, it's almost like I knew this shit was there. It just that I didn't, I hadn't looked. So I kept looking. And as a criminal defense lawyer, I'm trained, take a complicated set of facts and put it in a timeline. And when I did that, the top of my head came off because I saw an unbroken line from 1619 to the present that was not based on opinion or speculation, but based on fact, based on what the people who did what they did said about what they did, and taken from the time that these things happened. And so it was a jarring journey for me. And it took, I think the first time I gave this presentation in any form was on a bed sheet in my living room to some neighbors, just saying, does this make any sense? And that was probably late 2012, and I started giving it 2013, and I've been giving it ever since, and I still am giving it today.
Yeah, so you developed it into a lecture, your research, because you felt compelled to share it with other people.
I
Can you
did.
go ahead?
No, I was just going to say I felt like I knew how it impacted me. It made me feel stupid. It made me have all kinds of feelings, but most importantly, it had a radical impact on the way I saw the world and the way I saw America. And I thought, I wonder how many other people don't know this. And I think there's a huge number of people who have no idea about this history.
Sarah, how did you and your sister come to meet Jeffrey and hear this lecture and learn about this work that he was doing independently?
Well, in addition to being a filmmaker, I am also a criminal defense lawyer like Jeffrey. And I was invited to a free lecture at the local courthouse, the federal Southern District Courthouse in New York, where Jeffrey was presenting, and it was free, and I got credit for it to renew my law license. So I went, and I didn't know who Jeffrey was. I didn't think I needed the education that he was presenting. I thought I had the hubris to think that I knew what I needed to know about uh, our country's history of white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And I walked out of that conference room a changed person. There was so much that I didn't know that Jeffrey shared. And I was so impressed with how he shared it, the compassion and the warmth and the generosity that he, particularly as a white person learning this history, that I felt that um, uh, I felt welcomed into learning it. I felt that Jeffrey was sharing it, that he presented it as a history that had been stolen from all of us, and something that I could be angry at being denied in my education. that something we could all recognize together as a public collective failure in this erasure of our shared history, and something that we could all be called to do something about. And I felt called, and I felt called as a human being and as a lawyer, but primarily as a filmmaker. I thought, this is something that I know something about, and something that that my sister knows something about more than me. and I immediately called Emily and I said, Emily, there's something, I figured out what we're doing. And that's how it started.
And so, Emily, is that how it developed into a film idea? And I'm curious about the conversations that you had with Jeffrey. How difficult was it to convince him to participate in a film versus what he was already doing as a lecturer? And I'd also like to hear about the format, because you start off with the lecture, but then you so nicely take us into these moments where Jeffrey is touring the country and meeting with people and having conversations and interviews about this history that is very in the past, but also in the present.
Well, I think it's fair to say that when Sarah and I first sat down with Jeffrey, he had never thought about making a documentary film before. It was a totally new idea to him. Jeff knew the value of this presentation and bringing this information before audiences. And I think he was intrigued by the possibility that he could reach more audiences if we filmed it than he could physically on his own. You know, he's only one person and can only travel to so many places. So I think that was initially appealing. Oh yeah, you know, I could be in, you know, in California and Texas on the same night, you know. But I think initially we all, we just wanted to record Jeffrey's presentation, the best version of it possible. You know, we hadn't fully conceived of what this documentary would be, but we knew that the first thing we had to do was capture this presentation. And you know, and this was 2017, the first time that we all met together as a group. And then a year minus 1 day later, Jeff was on stage at Town Hall Theater in New York in front of a sold out crowd of 1,500 people, giving this presentation. You know, in the year, you know, we tried to pare down the presentation to you know, its essentials. We changed all of his slides, revamped the presentation itself, got some actors involved to read parts of it, got some a poet, some musicians, and really tried to put on a show. You don't, I mean, the majority of that stuff, like that we added, the artists aren't actually in the final presentation. But it did make for a beautiful night that everyone who was present for was glad they were there to see it. But once we had that, we knew that alone, as powerful as it is, you know, I mean, Jeff's presentation is 3 hours at its shortest, and it always leaves people wanting more. You know, there's no one in that audience who leaves early or is like, oh, you know, that was great, but man, you know, my back's sore. Everyone's always like, wow, that was really, you know, what more do you have, you know? So sometimes Jeff gives this presentation across like 2 days because he can actually fill more than 3 hours. But we knew we needed to take that and add something to it to make it an experience that could replicate the experience of seeing a live performance. I mean, live performances are they're just so exhilarating and inviting and enthralling that you don't really need much else, you know, because you're there and you're in the moment. But we wanted to put a theater audience in the moment with Jeff. So we knew we wanted to involve some personal narratives in order to do that, to really connect with audiences in the way that Jeff can when he's on stage. So we incorporated some stories of people that we met along the way as Jeff would travel and give his presentation. And then we also incorporated some of Jeff's stories, his personal narrative into this, because it's, you know, not only were the stories of his life experience relevant, they also gave you a window into who he is as a human being, and his vulnerability, his accessibility. It really, I feel like, helps Jeff cross boundaries into so many different people's lives. You know, he's such a relatable person, in every way. You know, and he just wears his heart on his sleeve. I can't imagine a better. I mean, what do you call him? A sort of spokesperson, star, you know, physical representation for this, because he really, you know, embodies this humanity, that's so inviting to audiences.
Yeah, I called him the protagonist of the story. He's kind of the main, well, he is the main star, and the main voice that we hear. I'm going to unpack a lot of what you said, Emily, because you touch on so many points. And then, you know, I'm also hoping that we could talk about some scenes in the film. But before we go there, one of the things that I'm struck by is the timing of the release of this film. It's coming in this moment where literally just last week, the American Library Association released a report saying that it has received an unprecedented number of book challenges. And many of those books that are being pushed in communities to be banned from being read are books that cover issues of race, gender, poverty. I'm wondering, what does this tell us in this moment about Americans and the willingness to reckon with history and really face the truth about the past? Jeffrey?
Well, I think there's a significant amount of dread in the minds and hearts of some people because, kind of like me, when I was finding stuff, I was shocked at one level, but at another level, I was like, you shouldn't be surprised at this. You've always known that something was going on beyond kind of, you know, what we talk about. And I think a lot of people feel like if we start to read and reckon with our actual true history, things will have to change and change in a significant way. And people are afraid of change. And so the desperation that you see in, you know, fourth grade parents screaming and making sure that their fourth graders aren't taught subjects that aren't taught until law school, that's not rational. That's fear. And the fear is that their children will start asking questions. Hey, did this really happen? Hey, did our family have anything to do with this? Hey, what are we going to do about this? Is this something that we should do something about? Because this is the normal reaction to understanding and finding out this information. So I think the degree of panic that you see is directly related to the fact that many people know that if we deal with our true history, things will change significantly in America.
And so there's fear, there's panic. But knowing this, Emily, who do you see as the target audience for this film? Who do you see engaging with this material, and how can the film actually connect with the people who we kind of need to see it the most? Those people, Jeffrey, who are so violently fighting against this history being shared.
I mean, I think we see the audience, or the potential audience, is very broad for this film. Our real obstacle is getting people into chairs, right? Because you read the title or the synopsis, and if you're a person who's uncomfortable thinking about race, you're going to think, huh, maybe I'll go see something else tonight, or maybe I'll turn the channel. But I think once we have someone in the chair in front of the film, once they see it, I think this film really has the potential to reach anybody who comes to it with an open heart and an open mind. You know, the question is how to find those people. We also feel like it's very important to meet uh, people while they're still young and developing ideas, right? To get this into schools. We all see this as a very important goal, and we saw that this is a very important goal initially when we first started the project. So Jeff can tell you about the Who We Are project in a minute, but one of the goals of the Who We Are project is to get this out educationally. and into the hands of teachers so it can be used in classrooms. But what you said earlier about how now seems like the perfect time for this movie, and this movie is coming out now. When we were finishing this film, we were racing to get it done because we kept thinking, erroneously, that we were going to miss the moment. The sad truth about this film is that it's timeless. That when at any moment that it would come out, you would say, wow, this is the perfect moment that this is happening, because you would see reflected in the society around you evidence of systemic racism and abuses. And you would say, wow, this really answers to that. But if this film had come out 2 years ago, that would have been true. 8 months ago, 6 months ago, unfortunately, maybe 2, 4, 6 years from now. We are very excited, though, to be part of the current dialogue. We feel like it's rich. We feel like it's people are getting more engaged. There's a lot more pushback, which is good. Jeff will say that when you're shaking people up and they're responding in ways that frighten you, it means you're doing something. You're reaching people. When books are being banned, that's a sign that people that you're close to really getting something out there, that there's fear, that people are frightened that information is going to get out there that they find is dangerous. And it's a scary thing to think about, that history is being viewed, fact-based history is being viewed as dangerous.
Yeah, no doubt. To think about this again, this active push to ban books, and even laws are being passed, Sarah, that say that in certain communities, the leaders don't want their teachers, their students to feel uncomfortable, right? That they don't want to have conversations that may make people feel guilty. And so they're trying to legislate feelings here and justify blocking history. I'm curious if you could talk about, how do you wrestle with a community? How do you introduce this material to people, even that your neighbors, your friends, who are not willing to confront not only the historical accuracy of it, but even the racial issues that we're facing today at this moment?
I think it's difficult, and it's something that we've wrestled with throughout the process of making this film. And particularly now, something that as a team we've had a lot of conversations about, kind of that this film is coming into the world at this time with with anti-CRT legislation, with the banning of books, with the changes to voter registration laws in states across and voting, the mechanism of voting, laws that change the mechanism of voting in states across the country. Fundamentally, though, I think the three of us are optimists, and we believe that there are more people who are open to this history than we may think. And throughout history, people in power have fanned the flames of racism in order to preserve the status quo, right? When you look at the text of many of these CRT laws across the country, you'll see that a lot of them are virtually identical. And when you see that, something is at work here. There are hands at work here. There's a mass manipulation that's going on. And I think there are people out there in power who are trying to create confusion. They're trying to distract us from the things that matter. They're trying to distract us from the good things that are actually going on. So, like battles for economic justice, unionization, the fight for 15 in fast food restaurants, the ways in which, Americans of all races are coming together, right? There's a mass coming together at this moment. Jeff talks about it in the film, about how this is the first time in history that we have people of all races taking to the streets together. And I think that this collectivization is frightening to people in power, to people with money who want to preserve that status quo. So I think that, you know, these images of these white people protecting their children and in fear of this knowledge is, you know, we have to be skeptical of where this comes from and believe that there is a populace out there that can come together and reckon with this history and move past it together, because the the only way around here is through. Right? We have this history. We have this open wound of slavery in this country and its legacy and the legacy of white supremacy. And we can get through it together, but we have to do it together.
Yeah, and so just like Dr. Maya Angelou told us, we can't unlive the past, but we can reckon with it and ensure that it doesn't happen again. I want to switch to you, Emily, and direct this question to you because I know one of the questions that gets raised a lot is why two white women made this film. And I'd like you to have the opportunity to answer that question. But also, Sarah talked about how, as you've been touring, what you've learned about each other and your own learnings as you've unfolded this film and previewed it to the world. So I'd like to hear about some of the things that you've learned in the making of this film and as you've shared it with the world.
Sure. You know, Jeff in his presentation talks about how this history has been stolen from all of us. And we take that to heart. This isn't a movie about Black history, Black American history. It's a movie about American history. And it's not the burden of Black Americans to carry this history, to retell this history. This is a history that was stolen from all of us, that we all have an obligation to learn and reclaim together. So we all feel that it's important that this film was made as a collaboration between white and Black creators to put this out into the world. Also, you know, as white and Black Americans, we hope that by working together, we're inviting people in, but of all colors, to come and see this film. This is not, we like to say this is not a calling out, this is a calling in, and everybody's welcome here at this table. And in terms of the second part of your question, and just to continue on that, and the other thing is that this is people ask us, a typical question you ask filmmakers: oh, how long did it take you? How long, from when you started? And we always say, 5 years. I mean, from the first time we had that coffee with Jeff. But in reality, it's not 5 years, it's 10 years, because Jeff, when we met him, had already been working on this presentation. This is Jeff's life's work. Sarah and I came onto this, way late in the game. If Jeff hadn't put together this amazingly researched, body of work, we would have never been able to make this film. It would have been entirely out of our reach. So this film is Jeff's work, and Sarah and I joined this project to help Jeff get this out into the world. And the relationship that we have with Jeff is one where Jeff owns the whole project, or actually now the Who We Are project. His organization owns the project. But when we met with him, we said, we understand this is your work. We don't want to own it. We don't want a piece of it. We want you to have total control over it. You can choose what comes in, what's taken out. We just really want to help you get this out into the world in the best way possible. So, we started to build a relationship of mutual respect at that point. We weren't coming in with any, ulterior motives or personal motivations. The only desire was to help Jeff get this out into the world. And what did we learn in the process? I mean, everything. There's people see this, we knew some of this history, very little of it, but even if you've heard of Tulsa, you haven't met Mother Randall, even if you've heard a telling of Tulsa where you've heard 350 people were killed. And that used to be the high number. Now you see this film, you're like, wow, 4,000 people are unaccounted for. What does that mean? So you may have heard some of these stories before, but you certainly haven't seen them in this timeline, and you haven't heard them with this amount of detail. So there's something for everybody to learn from this film, and we certainly learned a ton. I mean, just walking around the city where in New York City where we live and grew up, and looking at it in a totally different way. You know, we can't walk down in the Wall Street area and not see the well where enslaved women would was the only time where they could communicate with one another was when they were going to fetch water. Stories that we heard when we took a tour of downtown. You know, looking at the fingerprints in the bricks. I mean, I know we saw those in South Carolina, but enslaved people built this country. So you'll find fingerprints in every you know, major city on the East Coast, up and down. And it's just, you know, you just can't look at the world the same way after you've heard about this, because it's just, it's the meaning, your slant, your view, everything is totally changed. So it's hard to say what I learned, because Jeff's the best teacher that either Sarah and I have ever had.
Yeah, and when you talk about this country being built by the enslaved people, it reminds me of when former First Lady Michelle Obama said that regarding the White House, and even the pushback and the outrage that was verbalized at the time, because people either didn't know or didn't want to accept that that was and is a fact. I know that you talked about making this film and kind of targeting it for schools. If there are school teachers or educators in our audience, how do they get access to the film to show it to their students, Sarah?
I think I should pass that to Jeff.
I think if folks get in touch, and we can actually get you information that we can send out, but Sony is working with us to make the film available in schools, and so it's essentially getting in touch with Sony, and they will put you in touch with the folks who can license it for use in schools. So in a state like Illinois, where there is no anti-CRT law, we would be thrilled if there are teachers that want to use this film in their class, if they get in touch with Sony, or go to the Sony website. And I'm sorry, I just don't have it on the tip of my tongue.
Jeff, I'm gonna direct people back to your website and your organization. I think where people should go first and foremost is to the whoweareproject.org, which is the organization that, I mean, you're being generous, and Sony Pictures Classics has been great, and they're a wonderful partner. But Jeffrey has started an organization, the Who We Are Project, which is grounded in sharing this history as widely as possible. And the Who We Are Project is working on curricula for schools. There's already a study guide that's almost completed, that's going to be available to schools, and you can connect with the organization through the website.
I couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
So come to our website and you'll be able to see. And I do want to say that we are prepared to partner with school districts around the country who are interested in using this film as a teaching tool. And we are also prepared in states that do have anti-CRT laws. We're not going to be banging our heads against a wall with lawsuits. I think Sarah said it best. Do you really think schools are the only place children learn? And I don't know what these folks passing these laws think, but last time I saw teenagers, the quickest way to get them to read something is to tell them that they can't. And so, as opposed to fighting those laws, we will engage with teachers and parents and students in those states. And the Who We Are Project will go to those states and put on events where we invite high school students from all over the state to come and spend time with us, and to get information and to get resources so that they can do their own learning, because the classroom is just one place. So we will be prepared to challenge those folks in a way that they can do nothing about. And we win. Because as soon as the information gets out there, it gets spread. And one kid tells another, and they're on the internet, and one person finds this and finds that. And when that starts happening, there's nothing you can do to stop it.
And one of the great things about the film is that you have primary research within it, that you show actual documents and documentation and point. So it's like you cite where this research comes from so people can look it up and reckon with it and wrestle with it for themselves. I want to switch gears a little because I do want to take some time to reflect on some of the points that are made in the film that stood out to me. One was that, Jeffrey, as a child, you say that you attended a demonstration in Memphis where a teenager was killed by the police. In the film, you sit down and talk with Larry Payne's sister, Carolyn, and learned more about what happened that day. This piece of history that has long been hidden, particularly to those of us who live outside of Memphis and don't know the entire history of that moment. I'm just curious as to what it was like for you to sit with Carolyn. Had you maintained a long-term relationship with her since that happened? And just what was it like to hear her story? And Emily and Sarah, after Jeff speaks, I'm curious about the archival footage that you were able to find related to that, how you found it, and why it was so important to put it in the film.
I had never met anyone in the Payne family. And I think that's one of the remarkable things about this film. Um, they were willing to sit down with us and share their incredibly personal grief and story. I think they respected what we were doing. We certainly had conversations with them and meetings with them so they could understand who we were and why we were trying to do, what we were doing. And I think the Payne family wanted Larry's story preserved. It's like when we were talking about the Tulsa massacre, and it's like, oh, it was 300 or 400 people, and that's a lot. It's like, no, it was a lot more than that. And if you have Mother Randall and Chief and Christie on record demonstrating these things, it's harder to erase them. And they didn't want Larry to be erased. And he won't be. And the Who We Are project, on the day that Larry was killed, we try and acknowledge him every year and let people know that this is a young man who was killed for no reason, just no reason at all.
I think it's possible that oh, there you are, Lolly.
Sorry. Thank you so much for your patience. Yeah, I just got clicked off for a moment. Thank you for explaining that story about them. Emily and Sarah, can you talk about the archival footage of Pain and how you were able to locate that and add it to this film?
Um, well, once we found that clip, we couldn't believe it existed. To be quite honest, I thought it was a reenactment. I couldn't believe that there would have happened to have been. I'd heard the scene described. I'd read descriptions of it, of that there was an African American nurse who had been there, who had happened to be there and came to his aid, and that no one else was providing him medical attention at that point, and the ambulance didn't come right away. But then seeing that and seeing that all play out, it was really unbelievable. And to see, the yellow shirt he was wearing, we'd seen photographs of him taken earlier that day, and knowing it's the same, it's the same person, and it was just, it was just disturbing, amazing, and it was just like a story we knew we had to share with the world. We wanted to tell the story of King in Memphis and his experience there through Larry's story, through a story that audience would be new to audiences, and to give Larry that space that he never had. The first time we saw that clip, the Root had done a little piece on Larry and the sanitation strike, but we found it there, and then we couldn't find it anywhere else. And then eventually with our archival producer, we found it in the Memphis Special Collection, which is part of the University of Memphis. They said they had it, they couldn't find it, and then finally we got this beautiful piece of footage, and it's what you see in the film. And it's just, you make a film with the footage you have, but that scene with Larry's sister, Carolyn, is one of my favorites in the film, because we have that footage, because there's the footage of King in Memphis, because there's the sanitation workers footage, because we have this also found this beautiful photograph of Larry's mother looking into his casket at his funeral. When you're able to tell a story that richly with that much detail from the period, it's really special. So we feel very fortunate that we were able to put that scene together.
Yeah, the first time that I saw it, I thought it was a reenactment. Do you know why that footage was shot, who shot it, or any of the backstory of why it was recorded?
I believe it was news footage. I think there was protests going on all downtown. I mean, maybe Jeff knows more, but there were news cameras everywhere, and there just happened to be one there. There was probably someone heard a gunshot and ran over. I think it was just chance, happenstance. I'm not sure if we found out what news agency it came from. I don't think we did, because we only ever found it from that source. We never found it from a news agency source. But most of the footage that we got through the Memphis Special Collection was footage that was obtained through different news agencies.
Well, it was 1968, so it was either NBC, CBS, or ABC, one of those three affiliates, because there wasn't anybody else.
Wow. And unlike today, where it's like we see this footage on a loop, I'm sure that it was not seen at all. Jeffrey, do you know if the Payne family had ever seen this before?
I
Recently?
don't. And I don't think we had the footage at the time we talked to them. And so that was not something that came up. But as a kid, I don't remember seeing this on the news. I definitely remember hearing about it, but I don't remember seeing it on the news. So the first time I saw it, I did not think it was a reenactment, because I recognized that it was from the 60s. I recognized the uniforms, and I knew that this was like happening in real time.
Mhm.
And that photograph of Larry, I mean, his family didn't have many photographs left from that period. His sisters were younger than him, and both of their parents had passed away. But we found this one photograph on the internet. It was a very low quality, of Larry sitting in front of a table doing a puzzle, and if anything just says, youthful innocence, right? It's a child sitting there putting together a puzzle, so even though that shot was not the highest quality, and probably not a high enough quality to use in a film, it was just it still was such a powerful image, that we decided to use it anyway.
No, I'm glad that you did, and that you were able to kind of give us a little bit more of the backstory. Because again, what also strikes me is today we see some of the residue of these shootings on a loop, and it feels like we've been destigmatized from it, or that we've been numbed. But this footage existed, some 50, 60 years ago as well, and people turned away from watching it. Another point that you make in the film that I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit more. I thought, Jeffrey, that most people knew that Francis Scott Key was a plantation and slave owner, and that there was some controversy attached to the national anthem. But I think that you are able to unpack it for us a lot more and take us deeper into that history. When did you find out that this poem slash song had such a controversial, or had such roots in promoting slavery?
I, I can't tell you exactly when, as I was doing this research, that popped up, but I will say that when it popped up, I had never heard of it before. And I'm in my 50s when I'm doing this research. And, grew up in the middle of the civil rights movement, experience it, experiencing it, not reading about it. So I was really flummoxed that I didn't know this, and it was a very difficult thing. But when that popped up, it was one of the more impactful things, because I thought, how could I have not been taught this? And when you then start to read the backstory and understand what was going on, and this story of the colonial Marines, and it just really becomes remarkable. And one of the things that doesn't make it into the film is that I think it was Francis Scott Key's cousin that wrote the Dred Scott decision. So this was a family of people who believed in so-called white supremacy, and they made no bones about it. So Francis Scott Key's view was, how dare you fight against America, even if it's for your freedom, and we will hunt you down and put you in the dirt. And that's who he was. He wasn't somebody else. That's who he was.
I would just add to that, Lolly, that, Francis Scott Key had become, I guess, for want of a better word, so Disneyfied in this country, right? So Walt Disneyfied that we had, and it's changing now, but hundreds of schools across the country, in all states of the country, named after him. That was considered a name that was inoffensive enough to have that schools, not just in the South, not just in, that schools everywhere were named after Francis Scott Key, because the name evoked nationhood, right? And idealism and America and an anthem. It became totally divorced from who Francis Scott Key actually was. I mean, sometimes I feel like, we're living in science fiction, where we are this grand experiment of a country that's history has been stripped away from it. And it's like, how does a country survive? And there's somebody watching from the outside. What happens to these people when you take their history away? Like, what kind of stupid decisions will they make next? And one of those stupid decisions, when you take that history away, is to elevate this person, who is not a person who should have held that stature ever.
No, exactly. And so you revise history and create this new national narrative that promotes one thing, but we know that underneath that universal history that we're being taught, that there is the reality that we refuse to reckon with, right? And so my question is in this day and age of quote alternative facts and disinformation, then Sarah, how do you engage this conversation within a country of deniers?
I mean, that's the question, right? That's the $1 million question. I think, I don't know. I was reading, there's somebody on my social media feed posted a Martin Luther King quote today, and I'm not going to even try to remember the quote. But I think, but it was a quote that was grounded in love, right? And I think you do it with love. I think that's the only way to do it. I think you see that with Jeff in the film, when he's speaking to the man in front of the Confederate statue, who's holding so tightly to his mythology about what the United States means. And I'm not saying Jeff loved that man. I know Jeff did not love that man or that experience, but I think he engaged him with calm and patience, and from a place of love, meaning from a place where he believed that, that with the right information, that he was talking to a person who had the potential to shift his point of view, right? I think we just have to I think doing it with love means viewing every person as a person with that potential, viewing ourselves as people with that potential, because this is a journey that Emily and I have been on from beginning to end, where we have had to deal with shifts and grow through shifts in our own perspective and learning.
Yeah, and that kind of reflects back to what Emily was talking about about not calling out, but calling people in and receiving them as they are, but also giving them the material that they need to evolve in doing it hopefully that they will receive it and be willing to take that next step. I know we're running out of time here, but one of the things that also struck me about this film that touched me is that there are parts that are deeply personal for you, Jeffrey, and emotional and reveal such vulnerability. And one of those moments is when you have the reunion with your childhood friend Opie and Richard. And I wanted you to talk about how you came to probe that specific memory. Was what happened when you guys went to that movie theater something that always sat with you over the years, or was it something that came to you as you began to reflect specifically on racial incidents from your childhood? And what was it about that conversation with Opie and Richard? Because they became emotional too as they were talking to you, that was meaningful and lasting for this film. You're on mute.
When Opie and I went to the Crosstown Theater, and this was April or May of 1970, because that's when the movie Patton came out, and we went like as soon as it came out. And I was humiliated when they said you have to go sit in the balcony. But before I could even say anything, Opie is like running up the stairs. He's like, "Oh, cool, we get to sit in the balcony," because he didn't care. And I think what's interesting, you know, we were just talking about our childhood, and he and I did things. We did virtually everything together. And his parents, you know, it's one thing to be going to a school where you're the, you know, one of two black kids, but his parents saying, "Oh, you want to go spend the night at this kid's house?" And he would come into my neighborhood and do that. And so our relationship was really important as I tried to make my way through that school, because Opie ended up coming this close to playing in the NFL. He is the best natural athlete I think I have ever seen. And when you're a kid, you know, if you're an athlete, that's like one way you can be like accepted. And so my relationship with him was really significant. And so I remembered the Crosstown Theater. As soon as he started talking about it, I knew exactly I knew what he was talking about, but I didn't know that it was so fresh in his mind. Because I hadn't talked to Oak for like 30 years or so. And when I called him, our producers were saying, "Oh, Jeff, you know, come on, you got to get in touch with these folks. We got to get permission." And I kept saying, "You just don't understand. It's not going to be a problem." And when I called Opie on the phone at his law firm, he answered it, Bob Oriens. And I said, "Yo, Opie, it's Jeffrey." And he just started laughing. And I started laughing. And he and Dick, you know, met me immediately. When Dick brought up Walls, Mississippi, I remembered that trip immediately, but not for the reasons that he remembered it. And one of the things that I think was just so significant for me is that he had carried this for 50 years and never said a word to me. And he was probably 21 or 22 years old, because as close as we can figure it, it was 67, 68 around then that we went to Walls, Mississippi. And he was 21 years old. And yet, it really gets me when he said, "I tried to handle it," I think he said, "professionally." So Memphis was one of the most difficult and one of the best trips for me as we made this film. And had we not gone to Memphis, I wouldn't know that story.
I just want to add that they're actually going to do a special screening at the Crosstown Theater on the 24th of February. and we're all going down there for that. So that's going to be a very.
And we will not be in the balcony.
Wow. Yeah, I think it was just so telling. One, when you say that Richard carried this with him for so long, that these experiences are burdensome, not just to Black people, Sarah, but to all people who have to carry the weight and the burden that discrimination, that racism continues to impose upon us. I know we're quickly running out of time, but one of the questions I had for you, Emily, because you edited the film and you were so careful and precise in the editing, we see when Jim talks about, I'm sorry, when Jeffrey talks about the policing being tied to slave patrols, and you bring us right back from there to the modern times, right? So you're really good at shifting us through time on this film. But I'm curious about what didn't make it into the film. What was left on the cutting room floor? And how did you decide what you would leave out and what topics you just could not broach? Because you said he had about 3 hours worth of lecture and then he could go on for even longer.
There was so much. We was making doing a mini series, at a time. We were like, well, either we have to cut this down or we've got to break it up and make it a 4-part series. And honestly, we had the material to do that. But we really thought that to make one singular piece, even though it would just be a primer, couldn't possibly go into all the depth that it would need to. That would have the potential to reach a greater audience than a miniseries would, because it would be in theaters, it could be out there, it could be something shown in classrooms and sections, So we made that choice. But there was, there was tons. We went through a process while editing of taking things out and then adding things back in, and then and then taking them out again. And it was just, Jeff is a lawyer, and we needed him to make his case. We couldn't take too much out. It's he's building a case through the whole film, and he gets to the end, and you need to let him get to the end. You need to be able to buy what he's selling. So we left in as much as we needed to. I mean, there was a lot of things that didn't make it in. We did an interview with the woman who actually was a child at the time, 13 years old, when she answered the phone at the 16th Street Baptist Church when the bomber called and said 15 minutes and then hung up. And
2 minutes, right? They say 2, yeah.
And I think he said 2 minutes. All right. Well, either way, it happens. The bomb went off 17 seconds after the 2-minute warning. Anyway, I don't know how precise it was. But spoke to this woman. Sarah, do you remember her name?
Carolyn McKinstry.
Carolyn McKinstry. And just about how she processed that in her adolescent brain, and the weight she's carried from having that and having that knowledge and not understanding what it meant at the time, and then losing her best friend, who she had just seen in the bathroom putting on her makeup, getting ready for, that day had been a children's day, something that I didn't know. It was a day where the children do all of the services. And so whoever blew up that church knew it was a day that church was going to be brimming with children. And we interviewed a gentleman who was a sanitation worker and participated in the strikes, and was either about to retire, or his name, it was Mr. Nickelberry. He was about to retire or had just retired, was still in his 70s, was still driving a sanitation truck. The thing that he told us that he was most proud of was that now his son was his boss. So there were just, we had so many experiences, and we wanted this film to come in under 2 hours. So it was very hard, but we still have all of that stuff, and we're hoping to find a way to use it down the road, because it is so rich. And and there's this, Jeff's presentation is so much different today than it was then. So there's other avenues we want to explore further.
This movie is just the first thing that the Who We Are project has done. It's not the last thing. In our collaboration with Off Center Media, which is Sarah and Emily, it's the first thing that we've done, not the last thing. So all of that footage will be used in one way or another as we go about the Who We Are Project's goals of trying to educate America in every corner that we can reach about what our true history is.
Do you expect the film to be streamed? Will it be available on some of the streaming services or even played on PBS? Has that become a part of the conversation?
I think there is a schedule that the movie is in theaters now, and it will at some point in the future be streaming. And I think Sony would rather us talk about the theaters right now, so I'm gonna be a good partner with them. But yes, it is going to be streaming, and that'll come later this year.
We all think that it's very important that this film have a successful theatrical release. The only way that it's going to be found on streaming services wherever it lands is if the name is heard during this period, because there's so many films on these streaming services, and unless you like know the name and are typing it into a search engine, it's just going to be totally lost and buried. So we really think that this period is very important. We also think that it's a film that's very valuable to see with the community, with people with strangers. Jeff is speaking to an audience in the film, and it plays best when he's speaking to an audience, that are sitting in front of it watching. It's a film that provokes conversation. You're talking in the lobby, you're looking at the people next to you, and you're wondering what they're thinking. We really think that it's best seen in groups, which can be done ultimately in people's living rooms, and it will find its way there eventually.
Yes. But until then, we'll all do our part by going out to see it this weekend and supporting the opening of it. Again, I know we're running out of time, but one of the last questions that I have before opening it up, in case you have anything to add, is that at the end of the film, I noticed when we streamed it, it ends with gospel music. And I wondered if that was to strike an optimistic tone, and if you think that there is hope of a forward movement to a different America, or are these current events that we talked about indicative of a backlash? And that question comes from Maria. Thank you for watching, Maria.
What I would say is that when you have a country that's 400 years old, tipping points aren't a year or a month or even a couple of years. They're often a decade. We are at the same tipping point in 2022 that we were at in 2018 when we filmed at Town Hall. And it is not clear which way we're going to roll. However, if you look at those who do not want us to roll forward, those who want to go back to what we used to be, if you look at their behavior is desperate. Their behavior is maniacal. Their behavior is the behavior of someone who is losing the grip on what they have held very securely for a long, long time. So I think that there are all kinds of signs that say this could be different. And when you ask me if there's hope, I was saying earlier today that I got taught at law school by a man named Roberto Unger, one of the most brilliant people I ever sat in front of and listened to. And he and Cornel West have written some things, and one of the things they say in much more eloquent language than I'm going to use, because they use big words with 4 and 5 syllables, what they're saying is hope is not the cause of action. Action is the cause of hope. And so if you want to be hopeful, one of the first places you look is in the mirror. And what is it that I'm doing? There's all kinds of reaction that we've gotten to this film. And that reaction wouldn't be happening if we hadn't made the film. And so, we did something, and that increases the amount of hope because people are reacting to it. And as people react to it, and we do more, and more people react, I think that's how fundamental change gets started.
Thank you for that. Sarah, Emily, is there anything that you'd like to add or say that I haven't asked about that's important?
Just that if this film resonated for you, in addition to asking everyone you know and their to go out and see it in theaters, asking them to bring their children and because bring young people, because this is a film for young people. It's young people who are going to change our future, um, and to also to review this film on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. We have received a lot of hate from people who haven't seen the film and have given it, 1-star reviews. And I think what they're trying to do when they do that is stop other people from seeing the film. And it's important to counteract that hate and that fear by rating this film with what you believe it deserves, so you can serve as a guide for other people, and also to follow the Who We Are project on social media, because if you want to know, to look to what Jeff and the Who We Are project is doing in the future, that's the best way to stay in the know.
And we're opening in over 300 theaters on Friday. So if you know anyone in any other state, we're probably in a city or town near them. And you can find a list of every city we're opening in at the whoweareproject.org.
Can I just say one last thing? I mean, number one, thank you again, Sarah, because I should be promoting the project more. But we're opening in 300 theaters. We didn't have any clue that was going to happen, but we acted intentionally, and now it's happening. And so it's just an example of the way these things move forward. And I think for the work I'm trying to do and was trying to do when I started this presentation, I think the luckiest day for me was April or May of 2017, when Sarah needed some CLE credits and had to sit and listen.
Yes, everything is divinely ordered and occurs just the way it should. Thank you so much for that last word, Jeffrey. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us tonight. This has been an honor and a pleasure. It is such a sobering and important film. I know our Chicago watchers and viewers are going to encourage their friends to go out and buy tickets, see this, and talk about it. As Dr. Maya Angelou told us, history, despite its retching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Let's learn our history so we don't have to repeat it. Thank you so much for joining us at the Chicago International Film Festival, and good night.
Thank you.